Chapter 31, Cum Clauses. Chapter 31 covers the following: the formation and use of cum clauses, the irregular verb Fero, and at the end of the lesson we'll review the vocabulary which you should memorize in this chapter. There are two important rules to remember in this chapter. Rule 1. Cum clauses take the subjunctive mood, though in some cases they use the indicative, and they do not follow sequence of tenses. Rule 2. Fero is the product of composite conjugation, which means two verbs have been mashed up into one, and contains several athematic forms. The second test in this class looms ahead, and as we approach it, Wheelock shows his generous and merciful nature by slowing down your little boats from full speed ahead to go with the flow. The next two chapters are reasonably easy, at least by comparison to their immediate neighbors on either side. In this chapter, we'll address a very simple type of subordinate clause, the cum clause, along with one irregular verb, Fero, meaning bear or carry. In the next chapter, we'll look at adverbs and how they proceed through comparison, which is predictably, more predictably, most predictably. And we'll end this section of the class by lading three more irregular verbs on board your mental barges: wolo, nolo, and malo, all meaning wish one way or another. And then, Test 2. Insert thunderclap effect. But for the moment, smooth sailing. No big new concepts, clauses, or constructions. Kick back and enjoy the cruise. Our first destination aboard the SSPQR is the land of cum clauses, where life is peachy-beachy, simple, and straightforward. Take the conjunction cum, append a subjunctive verb, and you have a clause that begins when, since, or although. Now, this is the conjunction cum, not the preposition cum, the word that means with. Different words from different sources that only became identical in the classical age. The Roman playwright Plautus, for instance, who lived a century before the kind of Latin we're learning was spoken, Plautus wrote around 210 to 185 BCE, he used quam, Q-U-O-M, when he meant when, since, or although, the conjunction, and cum, C-U-M, when he meant with. But somehow between his day and Cicero's a century later, the two words had come to be spelled the same way, presumably because by then they were also being pronounced the same way, from which we must conclude that in practice there was never any real possibility for confusing cum with and cum when. And there's a clear reason for that. Cum, the with preposition, must be followed by an ablative case form. Conversely, cum, the when, since, or although subordinating conjunction, will rarely ever be. How often do Latin sentences naturally begin with an ablative? So, you see cum, and it's not followed by an ablative? It's when, period. Cum with an ablative after it? Guess with. The odds are strongly in your favor. Unless you happen to be reading Plautus, who tells you which one it is, cum or quam. The lesson is, read Plautus. Do it. He's hilarious. And one other piece of good news about cum clauses: they don't follow sequence of tenses. The Romans simply used whatever tense was appropriate for the meaning of the sentence. Cum can convey a number of sensibilities qualifying the main thought of a sentence. It can show circumstance, for instance, cum venires felix eram, meaning when you came, I was happy. You arrived, I was happy. Maybe it was because of you, maybe it was in spite of you. I'm not saying. It was just a matter of circumstance. Or cum can show cause, cum discesseris timui, meaning since you've departed, I've been afraid. I live in fear now because you're no longer here. The context of the sentence will tell you which is right, or at least better. One other way a cum clause can qualify a sentence is to express what grammarians call concession, basically an inversion of an expected circumstance. I thought everything was headed this way, but things ended up going that way, completely different from what I and logic would have predicted. The English word used to signal this concessive sense is although. So, where Latin says, cum reveniris tamen timeo, English would say, although you've come back, I'm still afraid. Who could have seen that coming? Often a signal that the cum in the cum clause means although is the presence of tamen, meaning nevertheless or still, in the main sentence. Did you notice there's nothing really uncertain about what's being expressed in the cum clauses above? You came, you departed, you've come back. They're all facts. By the classical age, and indeed well before, the subjunctive had begun to assume its new role as a subordination marker, not just an uncertainty beacon. That process was still, nevertheless, far short of perfect in its Latin tense sense, well into Cicero's time, which induced some very prominent Roman authors to put their cum clauses in the indicative mood, especially when the cum clause involved a present or future circumstance that seemed fairly obviously real. That happened less often with the past, something everyone can argue about. Why else would universities have history departments? And thus past tense verbs in cum clauses tended to stay in the subjunctive. Still confused? Read Wheelock, page 147, note 1. It'll change your life. On to the next part of this chapter, the irregular verb fero fere tuli latum, the only other challenge confronting you here. And you'll find the irregularity of fero really not all that irregular. Believe me, there's way worse out there in linguistics land. In Feroville, it's only a matter of visiting a few odd-looking forms and setting sail into the sunset of syntactic success. If Fero is anything, it's third conjugation, with two major complications. One, it's the product of two different bases mashed up into one verb, fare, which dominates the present tense system, and tool or lot, which rules the perfect. The perfect base tool is in fact originally the past tense of tolo, meaning lift or raise, a verb we studied earlier, chapter 22, and close enough in meaning to fero, bear or carry, for fero to borrow it. Pilfer might be more accurate. After which, tolo had no choice but to steal some other verb's perfect, in this case sustuli, from its compound subtolo, which promptly died following the amputation. Verb world can be a cruel place. Fero's perfect passive base, lot, is a combination of the zero grade of the tol base, tla. Zero grade is linguistics talk for a form that has only consonants, no vowels, plus the perfect passive marker, at, which is seen broadly across Latin, as in amatum. You do remember amatum, right? Resulting in tlat, which the Romans made more pronounceable by dropping the T off the front, thus latum. 2. The other major irregularity plaguing Fero is much less pervasive, involving only a few of its endings, which have no thematic vowel. The technical term is athematic. That is, there's nothing to buffer the fare base from the personal ending. That's the way the Romans inherited this verb from their Indo-European ancestors. However, if the inevitable collision of consonants produced something unpronounceable by Latin standards, the Romans, such an admirably pragmatic people, added a thematic vowel. But when the combination of consonants did work, well, why insult your maiores any more than necessary? Thus, fero, fares, fert. But feremus, note a thematic vowel's been added here, an I, as if fero were third conjugation, then fertis and ferunt. The Romans apparently considered fernt unpronounceable, so again a thematic vowel's been added. Thus, three forms in the present active indicative are athematic: fares, fert, and fertis. In the passive, feror, feris, fertur, The last two are clearly athematic. Ferimur, ferimini, and feruntur. All three of those have thematic vowels. So feris, fertur. Those are the only two athematic forms you have to memorize in the present passive indicative. The imperfect? Totally third conjugation regular. Ferebam, ferebas, active and passive. The future? Behold, the E and A in the first person singular you'd expect in a third conjugation verb. Nothing new to learn here. And the other forms in the present system? The infinitives are athematic, fere active, feri passive, as are the imperatives, fair and ferte. Remember fair? It was mentioned in Chapter 8, with the three other verbs which have athematic imperative singulars, dic, duc, and fac. But the present participle, fereins, has picked up a thematic vowel. Ferns, ferntis? No way. That's un-Roman. And the subjunctive? Easy as a diary. The third conjugation subjunctive marker A solves the athematic issue by buffering the basin ending as a thematic vowel would. So no problems there either. Feram, feras, ferat, blah blah blah. But if the present active infinitive is athematic, so will the imperfect subjunctive be. Ferem, feres, ferret. Ferret? Sounds furry. And the passive will be the same. Ferrer, ferreris, ferretur. Odd-looking, but predictable. Now, discipuli. Let's practice a few Fero forms. So strap on those athematic endings and bear, carry, bring, suffer, endure, tolerate, because that's what we Romans do. We ferimus. What does it mean? We'll use any of the 6 English translations of Fero. I'm going to pick one for each translation at random. Also, feel free to stop this presentation and figure out the translation of each Latin verb before I give you the answer. So, ferimus, we bear. Feretur, he, she, or it will be brought. Tuleras, you had carried. Feras, you suffer subjunctively. Latus sum, I have been endured. Ferebant, they were tolerating. Feretis, y'all endured subjunctively. Lati essemus, we had been carried subjunctively. Feri, to be suffered. Tulissi, to have borne. Tulisses, you had tolerated subjunctively. And latum erit, it will have been brought. But what will have been brought to you? The vocabulary, of course. The first word is annus anni, masculine, meaning year. It's a second declension masculine noun, often used in the ablative of time. For instance, uno anno, meaning in or within 1 year. The next word is auxilium auxilii. Yep, that's 3 I's in the genitive singular. Neuter, meaning aid or help. It's a second declension neuter noun. What's its accusative plural? Neuter. Neuter. Yes, auxilia. Next is navis navis, feminine, meaning ship. A third declension I stem noun, which means its genitive plural will be navium. How would Latin say in a ship or by ship? That's the ablative of means, right? And does the ablative of means use a preposition? No. So what's the ablative singular ending of a third declension feminine I stem noun? Is it I? No. The only change from usual third declension in a masculine-feminine I stem is to add an extra I in the genitive plural. Thus, the ablative singular of nawis is nawe, with a short E ending like most third declension nouns. The next word is aiquas meaning level, even, calm, equal, or just. It's a first-second declension adjective. Literally, it means level or even, a definition that can be applied to anything horizontally stable or balanced, even the ocean. Indeed, the Romans sometimes called the sea the aequum, the level thing, when of course it was being that way. Other times they used less positive language. Aequus also has a figurative sense, just or fair, in reference to things which are morally or ethically well balanced. This sense stems from the image of level scales in a balance. Finally, this adjective has another sense, a mental one, calm, seen, for instance, in the idiom aequo animo, literally, with a level mind, meaning calmly. It's an ablative of manner missing its cum, as ablatives of manner can do when there's an adjective like aequo attached to the noun. The next word is apud, a preposition meaning among, in the presence of, or at the house of. It takes an accusative object. For example, apud amicos, meaning among friends, or apud Vergilium, at Virgil's house. Woohoo! Party at Virgil's. That ought to be epic. Next is cum, the subordinating conjunction introduced above that means when, since, or although. The clause it starts usually contains a subjunctive verb. And when there's a tamen in the main sentence, the Latin adverb meaning nevertheless or still, the cum in the cum clause assumes the sense although. Tamen is technically post-positive. That is, it comes second in its sentence, although it can come first when the cum clause serves as the first element. Next up is fero, fere, tuli, latum, meaning bear, carry, bring, suffer, endure, or tolerate. If anything, it's third conjugation. And we've already endured its oddities, no need to revisit them here. Here we need to address a different feature of fero, the fact that it sired a number of important compounds. For instance, attach con onto the front of fero. Con is the form cum, with, takes when it's used as a compound, and the result is confero, confere, contuli, collatum, meaning literally bring together, often with the sense compare. Its third conjugation-ish, like its base verb fero, whose irregular athematic forms it follows. For instance, conferes, confert, confertis, and so on. With the reflexive pronoun, confero takes on the sense go. That is, se confere means literally to carry or betake oneself, as in, me ad Graeciam contuli, I betook myself to Greece, which is one way of saying in Latin, I went to Greece. What do you think the English derivative collate, based on the fourth principal part of this verb, means? What have you done if things have been brought together? They've been assembled. And how would Latin say, let us compare? That's a jussive subjunctive, isn't it? And what conjugation, if any, is fero? Third, what vowel is used to create the present subjunctive in that conjugation? She reads, So, dear diary, the answer is conferamus. Another thirdish conjugation compound of fero is offero, offere, obtuli, oblatum, meaning offer. What are oblations, an English derivative of this word? That's right, offerings. And how would the Romans have said they had offered, let's say, in the subjunctive? What tense? Pluperfect. What voice? Active. So how is the pluperfect subjunctive active formed in Latin? The perfect active infinitive plus endings. Thus the answer is obtulicent. And what about to be offered, the present passive infinitive? Yes, it's one of those athematic forms, offeri. And what about the other to be offered, that is, about to be offered, the future passive participle? And let's make it nominative singular, neuter. How are gerundives formed in Latin? Gerundivs, hint, hint. The present verb base, plus thematic vowel, plus nd, and first, second declension endings. So, offerendum. Next is another verb, respondeo, respondere, respondi, responsum, meaning answer. Its second conjugation. Literally, it means pour back, re back, spondeo pour, a metaphor taken from formal prayers in antiquity, which were often conducted in a sort of call and response format, where one person said something and another answered. Several ancient vases showed the process of worshippers exchanging prayers and at the same time pouring out libations, liquid offerings, usually wine, onto an altar as a gift to a god. Because of this ritual, to pour back came to mean to respond or answer. Here's another noun, exilium exilii neuter, meaning exile or banishment, its second declension, and can also be spelled exilium without the s. Literally, it's a compound of the prefix ex, meaning out, attached to the verb base il, meaning go, a base that's seen in a slightly different form, ul, in ambulare, to walk, literally to go on both, amb, presumably, legs. As far as we can tell, that is how most Romans walked. And the last noun in this vocabulary list is vinum vini, neuter, meaning wine, its second declension. And the last word in this vocabulary list is mediocris, mediocre, meaning ordinary, moderate, or mediocre. It's a third declension adjective, and thus by definition, I stem. So what's its accusative plural? That is, how does Latin say ordinary things, the neuter plural substantive, as a direct object, for instance? Good, mediocria. Do the rules that were cited at the beginning of this chapter now make sense to you? If not, please review this presentation. If so, please proceed to the next slide. For the next class meeting, please bring in a copy of the practice and review sentences for Chapter 31. You'll find them on page 149 of Wheelock's text. Cum haec difficilima cognoveritis, vos esse discipulos optimos ostenderitis.